And we're going live, and we're live. Aha! Hello, everybody out there in YouTube land. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're on a little bit early as always, just to make sure we get on okay. So about a minute to go before we'll get the program going. So if you're out there in YouTube land, have a wee hello. Say hello in the wee chat section if you like. And I suppose tonight we're going to be getting on with chapter 15, aren't we? This is one of our big chapters. I suppose one of the first, this one and the one following it is going to be the banquet scene that are really quite important within Dune. Excuse me. And this one's generally, I suppose this scene has been filmed a fair bit, hasn't it? How it's been handled by the different films and TV shows over the years. But there's quite a lot of detail in this chapter. And really, it's kind of a bit of an excursion for the Atreides, isn't it? It's a little bit of a field trip as they pop out to check out their mining, I suppose their mining operation, really, you know. So it's quite a dense chapter. Oddly enough, reading through it, I thought actually it's a pretty interesting chapter until the action kicks in, and then we have a little bit of, I suppose, almost techno babble for a wee bit, and then things get more interesting again, you know. There's Babs saying, "Evening, Doc." Hello, Babs. How's it going? Hope you're keeping well. Yeah, thanks for joining us as always. So all set. It's been another lovely day here today, by the way. I haven't managed to get out at all, so I've missed all the glorious sunshine, I have to say. I've been stuck in here, working away at all sorts of things. So this chapter took a fair bit of work to do, just to work through. There's quite a lot of information in it pertaining to spice, and Dr. Leo Keynes, of course, we're meeting for the first time properly. And we kind of get Kynes sizing up the Atreides sizing up Kynes, Gurney being a bit threatening, etc. And I said a chance to investigate, to head out of the city and check out Arrakis in the desert and one of these spice mining operations. So there's a fair bit to this chapter, I have to say. There's Cynthia saying, "Hi, Doc and Babs." Hi, Cynthia. Thanks for joining us. Excuse me. Before we get going, I was telling you guys I'd picked up a absolute, I don't know, oddly enough, it says $8.99 on this. It didn't cost me that. I bought this new for about £6. Eratosthenes and Hyginus's Constellation Myths. And I thought actually tonight, whenever we're talking about Leo Keynes, we have an association with Leo Keynes with the hair. And I just thought we could use this to have a wee look at, just to see if it's helpful in terms of what it represents for his character. Look at the constellation Lepus, the hare, the rabbit, if you like. It is actually meant to be a hare. So I thought that would be interesting. We could take a wee nosy at that tonight, if you like, folks. And see because we do have an association with the hare. With Leo Keynes, I suppose it has quite a few varying mythological associations. Has a particular one in Ireland, for example, is associated with changelings and is considered extremely bad luck, bad fortune to eat hare over here, I suppose. And of course, you have a bunch of tales about, I suppose, you've got things like the tortoise and the hare from. So tonight is the night of the Lepus. Very good, colleges and cannibals. It is indeed. We'll have a wee nosy at it. Yeah, just see if it informs us a wee bit about Kynes, I think. It was one of the reasons why I was really interested in picking this up, I think, because there's a lot of associative myths with constellations. And I suppose the stories tend to vary a wee bit back and forth. You know, there's Joseph Smith saying, hey. Hi, Joseph. Thanks for joining us. But I actually haven't had a chance to I've been down to have a wee look through this. So I thought, well, just for the first time, I've just kind of had a wee quick look at the bump on the back of the book and had a wee nosy through the introduction. So I'll be looking up Lepus for the first time tonight, and we'll just see if it has anything to do with Leo Keynes. You know, I think that might be interesting. There's D. Viller saying, "Howdy all." Howdy, D. Thanks for joining us. Howdy, the doghouse guy. Yeah, I might have the two dogs in here shortly. As my wife's about to take my son off to play Pokemon, I think, is it he's playing tonight, or possibly Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something like Vanguard. One of those card games. Excuse me. So, this is a big chapter, so I suppose we better get going. And we'll start with the epigraph. There we are. And we'll just read it out, actually, just get through it. My father, the Padishah Emperor, took me by the hand one day, and I sensed in the ways my mother had taught me that he was disturbed. He led me down the hall of portraits to the ego likeness of the Duke Leto Atreides. I marked the strong resemblance between them, my father and this man in the portrait, both with thin, elegant faces and sharp features dominated by cold eyes. Princess daughter, my father said, I would that you'd been older when it came time for this man to choose a woman. My father was 71 at the time and looking no older than the man in the portrait, and I was but 14. Yet I remember deducing in that instant that my father secretly wished the Duke had been his son and disliked the political necessities that made them enemies. And this one's from In My Father's House by the Princess Irulan. So as much as we've, I suppose, interestingly enough, why this epigraph here? And I think it's more to do with leading on from the previous chapter, that moment where we realize that our father is a mortal of flesh and blood, and we get a bit more of this with Paul. And I think it's kind of showing a similar moment for Irulan. I suppose what's kind of interesting, the idea of an ego likeness of Duke Leto Atreides. I wonder what that is. That sounds fun, doesn't it? Whenever I just looking through the epigraph and Irulan looking at her father in the ways my mother taught me, is it with the Bene Gesserit eye, if you like? I suppose it's quite a strange wee thing, that this little epigraph. Their physical similarities noted. They're both hawkish men, aren't they? Thin, elegant faces dominated by cold eyes. But I think just the one thing that's quite interesting, I suppose, if you actually pick it apart, Princess daughter, he says, this is kind of appalling. And again, I suppose it shows you the nature of, I suppose, what a sexist society this is, this bizarre feudal society. Princess daughter, my father said, I would that you had been older when it came time for this man to choose a woman. I think what an appalling statement to make to your daughter. And I thought it was interesting. It says my father was 71. You could kind of imagine if he was 71 and doting, perhaps. But no, yeah, I suppose it's about the aspects at the same time of what's likable about Leto Atreides. And I suppose this chapter is quite interesting in that sense, because I've been doing it, well, not myself really, but we've been looking at the propaganda, haven't we? And it hasn't really been matching what we're seeing of Leto. And I think in this chapter we do get to see a bit of Leto as described, as advertised, if you like, as a bit of a hero. You know, Joseph saying, have Brian and Kevin made an Irulan book yet? God knows. Irulan's quite an interesting character. I suppose, yeah, I think actually Irulan's an excellent character. And again, we don't see too much of her in Dune at all. But we do see a fair bit of her later on, don't we? So, secretly wished that his duke had been his son, disliked the political necessities that made them enemies. And I suppose, yeah, it gives us a little bit of insight into what Irulan thinks of her father. You know, it's a little bit of a compare and contrast, and it doesn't really, you know, initially we think, what's this epigraph got to do with anything really here? But I think it is a comment about Leto, and for once we're going to kind of see him live up to his reputation. I think he's a bit heroic in this chapter, even though I think some of his faults are still at work here. So, okie dokie. We start off with Dr. Leo Keynes, his first encounter with the people he had been ordered to betray left Dr. Kynes shaken. So there we go. He's been ordered to betray them. And his first encounter, I suppose, as we're putting it this way, is our first encounter with Leo Keynes as well. And we start to find out a little bit about him here. We're told that he prides himself on being a scientist. And we get a little bit of a sense about how he looks at legends, etc. He prided himself on being a scientist to whom legends were merely interesting clues, that point towards cultural roots. And of course, we get this, but how the boy fitted the ancient prophecy so precisely. So, I think what we're told about Kynes is a little bit paradoxical, really, and in terms of this kind of legend thing. He prides himself as being a scientist, legends, clues towards cultural roots, this kind of thing. Yet we really do see a man kind of questioning the active elements of a prophecy here and trying to put two and two together, I think, to try and make them logical in his own head. But as I said, we get this sense that he's a scientist. He's not going to maybe buy into some of this stuff, but in fact he is. And I think in that sense, he's very representative of what's going to happen to the Fremen. And of course, we're told things that line up with this ancient prophecy. I think somebody was asking recently, in terms of when did the Bene Gesserit sow the particular myth on Arrakis? The clue here really is ancient, isn't it? It's an ancient prophecy, so quite some time ago. Paul has the questioning eyes and the air of reserved candor. And of course, we're on to prophecy straight away. And I think the next little bit's quite funny. Prophecy left a certain latitude, as do they all, don't they? And whether the mother goddess would bring the Messiah, okay, or she would produce him on the sea. So there are options for prophecies, etc. And let's see. Yeah. I think there's a couple of little things, but just the mother goddess, and that, I think, it's reference to this person's part in the prophecy, and that would be identifying Jessica, I think. But with Paul being the Messiah here, but it gives little clues as to kind of the religious aspect of the Fremen, I suppose, that we can pick up on later. Something saying maybe the bullhead is the ego likeness of the old Duke, thus its seeming importance to Leto. Yeah, bullheaded would. I was thinking about that as well, actually, because I was having a wee look at one of the clips from the most recent film with the portrait of the Duke and the I suppose a little miniature, isn't it, of the bull's head? But yeah, bullheaded. Yeah, the ego likeness. It's a good one, Cynthia. Yeah. And it's interesting that both men are quite hawkish, I suppose, in that sense. You would kind of expect some kind of, I always thought sort of, if it was an animal representation, the hawk or the eagle. As I said, that's how Leto likes to look at himself, but maybe it is just bullheaded. There's an odd correspondence between prediction and persons. So certain predictions are lining up with these individuals. Again, we're being told, again with Herbert playing with time, by the way, this is a past tense thing here. His first encounter had been, the people who had been ordered had left Dr. Kynes shaken. So at this point, we're getting the same sort of resetting thing. We've been moving through onto the second day, early morning, and now we're up to mid-morning. Excuse me. So they're meeting again outside the Arrakis Landing Fields Administration building. This is the exterior of the same scene that we'd had before. And we're told, and we get, again, a little bit of a setup. There's an unmarked ornithopter squatting nearby, humming like a somnolent insect. There's an Atreides guard with a bared sword, and the air has a distortion of a shield. And we get this, here we get the first of these attitudes from Kynes, I suppose. That he sneers, and we'll get this more than once at shield technology. And he thinks, Arrakis is a surprise for them, for them there, and a sneaky, nasty surprise, not a nice one, I suppose. So it's an interesting meet, I suppose, for the first time meeting a character. He's mysterious, and I think that's what we're getting a little bit of his inner thoughts. And we're told, of course, the planetologist raised the hand, signaling for his Fremen guard to fall back. And we focus on that. I suppose we go to the entrance of the Atreides building, this modern building, and we get again, this it's described as exposed, monolithic. And again, here we go. So much less suitable than a cave to live in. So, so we're kind of getting this sort of juxtaposition of, I suppose, technology, really, isn't it? That this man sneers at shield technology and thinks how ridiculous this building is. It would much rather be better off in a cave. So I think it instantly makes him, in this kind of far future, even though there is a retarded atavism to the Dune universe, it kind of, oh, okay, that's a bit interesting. You know, that this, and the term planetologist for us, of course, we're going to have it explained a wee bit as well. So there's movement within the building's entrance. It's described as a dark hole in a plastic coated rock. And I think that almost the sort of aperture, if you like, that the Atreides come out of, the entrance doors, will remind you later on, if you look at the description, I think, of the worm's mouth as it emerges and swallows the crawler factory. So the entrance doors swing wide open. And just prior to this, he's adjusting his robes, the set of his still suit at the left shoulder. And again, we'll probably not think too much of this at this point, but it'll be the still suit we're going to find out quite a lot about in this chapter. So the entrance doors swing wide open, and out come some Atreides guards. They're swift. They're all heavily armed. We're told they have slow pellet stunners, swords, and shields. And behind them, coming first, we get Leto. So from Leo's point of view, again, we're going to get a bit of a sizing up of both Leto and Paul. In fact, there's a lot of this going on here. Everybody's trying to sort of get a sense of each other. So again, we're told that Leto is a tall man, hawk-faced, dark of skin and hair. He wears a jubba cloak with an Atreides crest at the breast. He wears it in a way that shows that he's unfamiliar with it. It clings to the legs of his still suit on one side, and he lacks the free swinging, striding rhythm, if you like. So already a critical eye on Leto from Leto in terms of how he's wearing this thing. His unfamiliarity marks him out. And then he goes looking at the youth, I suppose, which is Paul. We're told he has the same dark hair, rounder in the face, but small for the 15 years Kynes knew him to have. So Kynes has some information on Paul. That Paul has a sense of command. And it's interesting that that's not in the description of Leto. Leto doesn't have a sense of command to Leto. Paul does. There's a poised assurance, as though he could see and knew things around him that were not visible to others. And we'll get a bit of that in this chapter as well, where we'll actually see Paul picking up on things that other people aren't noticing. He wears the same style of cloak as the father. Another comparison, yet with casual ease. And it made one think as if he'd always worn it. And here we go. Here's this word, prophecy. And again, so that these kind of sartorial efforts by the Atreides make Leo Keynes think of a particular prophecy. The Mahdi will be aware of things others cannot see. And if you think about it, I was actually quite kind of enjoying these prophecies, if you like, as I read them, because I do like things like that. There are often, in fact, almost everything like this has a loophole, if you like. And so the Mahdi will be aware of things others cannot see. In terms of any general prophecy, it's going to fit loosely to anything. We're all aware of things that others cannot see. So it shouldn't be too hard to fit. And I was kind of wondering, why is a scientist as Kynes not thinking like that? Which is interesting, I suppose. And just because Kynes is a scientist, I don't think it's almost as if he wants to separate himself from prophecy, religion, etc. But I don't think that's possible, not as a fremen. So again, we get a bit of past recall. He's sizing these people up. They're just people, guard like them for the desert. And Kynes recognizes Gurney Halleck, again from a past recall, who had briefed him on how to behave with the Duke and the ducal heir, telling him that he has to refer to Leto as my lord, sire, or noble-born, if it's more formal occasions, to refer to Paul as the son, young master, or my lord. And we're told also that Gurney comes across a wee bit as a bit of a henchman in this chapter. I think we're also told that the Duke is a man of much leniency, but brooks little familiarity. And I've just put here, this seems quite odd, mainly because Kynes is an imperial planetologist in the employ of the Emperor, and I think he would know perfectly well how to behave around titled and property people, I suppose, So I just thought, the Gurney, I don't know, it seems to be Gurney's role in this. There's no questioning of it. It's not that Gurney takes a bit much upon himself or anything like that. I just thought it seemed odd, and I got the sense really in this is one of the first moments where I get the real sense that Gurney's a bit of a henchman. In some ways, he's a rough, isn't he? But there we go. So it's funny that I suppose whenever titles and stuff, people demanding to be referred to by a particular title, it often doesn't go well for them in the modern day world, does it? I think you get the odd actor going, I'm sir, this, you must call me sir, and would get them called a lot of other things, I think, very quickly. But there you go. So we get a little bit of Kynes' thoughts here, as they're approaching. And this is quite I don't know. He's in a bit. It almost seems like he's in a bit of a mood here. He's not a happy bunny, as they say. They'll learn soon enough who's master of Arrakis. Order me questioned half the night by the Mentat, will they? Expect me to guide them on a inspection of space mining, do they? Huh? And the answer is yes, they do. And that's exactly, as I put down here in the notes, and here we are, it's exactly what he's doing. He has been questioned half the night by Howat, and he is expected to guide them on an inspection of space mining, which is what's about to happen. But there's really, he's not happy. They'll learn soon enough who's master of Arrakis. And I think the important part of that, I suppose, is that this is what Kynes thinks of himself, that he is the master of Arrakis, I think. Let's see, I'll catch up with some comments. There's Sootpot saying, evening, y'all. Evening, Sootpot, thanks for joining us. And D. Viller saying, so that is one of those things where protocol and ways to act is huge among some groups. I saw that in the military where, depending on who it is, they take things serious. So it struck me that Gurney was just very loyal and wanted folks to respect the man he respects. Yeah, I get that. He's serious about his business. I think it's more the other side of it, that the idea that someone like Kynes wouldn't know how to behave. If you see what I mean. And yeah, even amongst the Harkonnen and stuff, this is a feudal society, so I'm assuming there's going to be titles aplenty. How to buy this kind of thing. But yeah, it's kind of just putting him on. And I also get the sense then there's something that Paul says later on, just in what we're saying here, D, that the Duke brooks little familiarity. There's a little comment later on about whenever the Duke's in a rage, and it could be possibly a bit of preemptive work by Gurney to make sure that people don't make him lose his temper by giving him the wrong titles or this kind of thing. And it's, I suppose there's a two-way street with that, in that the way Gurney's talking to Leo Keynes about how to speak, in deference to Leto, they don't really know who he is at all and what level of respect he's got. So yeah, again, the Atreides are a bit kind of bullish about it, I suppose. So we learn of the import of Howat's questions, that this is warned Kynes that they're after the Imperial bases. This is what the Atreides want from them, and obviously that they learned them from Duncan, Idaho. And And there is a couple of wee paradoxical things in this. I suppose we'll point them out, but pretty much they're all to do with, I suppose, this. I will have Stilgar send Idaho's head to this Duke, Kynes told himself. And there we go. And simply put, whatever Idaho has done, he has betrayed one of the secrets of the Fremen to the Atreides. That's the way Leto Kynes is looking at it here, and is not happy, but wants to send this guy wants to send Idaho's head to Leto. And in terms of how we move throughout the chapter, that sense of if the Atreides are doomed, they're betrayed, I'm going to send this guy his head. It makes you kind of ask why is Kynes so helpful and wanting to I must get you the book, this kind of thing, as he proceeds. So I think it's his initial attitude's quite harsh, and we're meant to sort of get a sense that through the actions of the Atreides in this chapter, that Kynes' attitude softens to them a bit, I think. And there, as we've been getting all of this kind of sizing up as they've been approaching, and up to the point where now we can hear their boots crunching on the sand. And the one thing that I made a wee point of here really is that Liet is not the master. Well, actually, I've put Liet, not Leto, is the master of Arrakis. But in this sense, I think Liet Kynes is in a fair bit of potential peril here, if you like. Yeah, so we have them all meeting here, actually. My Lord Duke. And he buys, of course, and we get the flip. So whereas we've had Liet Kynes studying Leto and Paul, now it's the other way around. Let's have a look at this guy. So Leto has a good look at him. Again, quite a bit of description. We're told that he's tall, thin, dressed for the desert. He has a loose robe, a still suit, wears low boots. His hood is thrown back with a veil hanging to one side, has long sandy hair and a sparse beard. But in particular, we're told that Kynes' eyes are fathomless and with a blue within blue under thick brows. And also that he has the remains of dark stains smudged his eye sockets. Pardon me. So here we go. Hello, how are you? So you're the ecologist, the Duke said. Again, this is Leto jumping in, not having found out the information, I suppose. Not a major crime or anything. You're the ecologist. No, I'm a planetologist. We prefer the old title, planetologist. And again, if you think about it, what Kynes has been through, how you refer to, he's been instructed how you refer to the Duke, how you refer to Paul. But here we are, straight away, Leto walks up to him and goes, so you're the ecologist? No, I prefer the old title, planetologist. That's and so it's almost playful, I think. It's a bit, it's almost a bit of have a bit of a taste of your own medicine. And it puts, I suppose, little things like this put Leto at a disadvantage, I think, throughout this chapter. And it tends to be that I think the way I would look at it is, see what you think actually as we go. I think that Leto tends to have assumptions or has certain pieces of information and goes with them and makes a statement like that. Whereas Paul tends to ask questions, and then evaluate what's going on before. So there's a bit of a difference in how the two of them think and how they go about thinking, I suppose. So I'm going to introduce you to my son. So Leto basically goes, here you go. This is the judge of the change, the arbiter of dispute. Lets Paul know this is the man set here to see that the forms are obeyed in our assumption of power over the five. And this is my son. And it's and again, it sounds like a very, very, very clumsy and kind of lopsided, unbalanced introduction, I suppose. Yeah, and as much as as much as he introduces Paul to Kynes at that point, he doesn't tell him his name. Doesn't go, this is, excuse me. Yeah, interestingly enough. So straight off with the pertinent questions, my Lord Kynes says to Paul, "Are you a Fremen?" And again, this is Paul, straight to the chase, really. If there's a bit of doubt, he tends to ask a question. Kynes says that he's accepted in both sietch and village, is in His Majesty's service, and is the Imperial Planetologist. So I've just made a wee note that the answer is actually yes, but he hasn't. Yes, he is a Fremen, but he hasn't said so. So he's not giving Paul a yes or no answer. And I think we get a fair amount of that kind of evasion in the Dune universe, really because of truth sayers and truth sense. Cynthia is saying, I was also surprised that Kynes would be interrogated half the night about information. Is that the proper way to treat the judge of the change, an imperial servant? Yeah. Again, he's here on business. And we're told earlier, Cynthia, that the Harkonnen haven't been able to bribe him. Isn't that correct? But certainly, I think this is I suppose, I don't know, there's all of this in some ways is getting information out of Kynes in relation to spice mining and what he knows about the planet. But the Atreides are also, they're out to get stuff from him here. And I think I said they've kind of put him in a sit up front with Leto and off we go in the helicopter. And where can he go? He's a bit of a captive audience in this sense, I think. But yeah, and again, it just doesn't really make sense, and I think the Fremen wouldn't be too happy about it. But maybe at the same time, if they see no harms being done, they would just stand back. But if he's been kept up half a night and then let's go fly in the desert, I'm sure he's not happy. So Paul is impressed by Liet's air of strength, Kynes' air of strength. And we're told again, we get another little bit of a past kind of prior to this, that they've had a look at him before these events have started. Halleck had pointed him out to Paul, that he had a Fremen escort and was moving now towards the Ornithopter. So this is the events just prior to this chapter starting. Paul observes him through binoculars, notes that he has a prim, straight mouth and a high forehead. Halleck has a view of him here. I suppose we get a different, that's just from Paul's casual observation at a distance. We get a bit more of what Paul thinks here. But Halleck, in that sense, he says, he's an odd sort of fellow, precise way of speaking, clipped off, no fuzzy edges, razor apt. And of course, Leto's view is scientist type. And he's not a particular, I don't know. He's certainly an interesting scientist type, isn't he? I think Leo Keynes is a very interesting character. Of course, Paul's view is a bit different than Leto's scientist type. He senses the power in Keynes, the impact of his personality. And we're told that Paul looks at him as though he were of royal blood and has this, that he was born to command. I've made a wee note, nobody's born to command. And so, so the three men have a very, I suppose, as much as Kynes is sizing up Paul and Leto, and a little bit of Gurney here later, everybody's kind of sizing up Kynes, and we have three quite different views of him. Halleck sees him as odd, but generally there's something precise about him. No waffle, that kind of thing, which would probably appeal to Halleck, but then the same, Halleck is quite waffly and flowery and so on with all his quotations and so on. The Duke sees him as a scientist type, single word category. He's a scientist. Paul senses power, personality, as if he were royalty, a sense of command. So each of these three men get a very different sense of what Kynes is to themselves, I suppose. And arguably, Kynes is all three. But if you put the three things that Halleck, Duke Leto, and Paul think, I'd say that Halleck is actually all of those. But each man there is only able to discern a certain amount, I think. So we have the gift of the still suits and the cloaks, and a bit of Arrakis equipment that we all know. We're going to get a fair bit on the still suits here. We're told these ones are, of course, of Fremen manufacture, and they've been tailor-made using dimensions for the royal family provided by Gurney Halleck. So we have a concern of Leto here. I was concerned that you said you couldn't take us into the desert unless we wore these garments. The Duke said, we can carry plenty of water. We don't intend to be out long, and we'll have air cover. The escort you see overhead right now, it isn't likely we'll be forced down. And it's, I've put that this is kind of, well, my own comment is that it's ignorant and assuming of Leto. Leah said he couldn't take them down. It's more like shouldn't or wouldn't, I suppose. And they've tried, we can carry plenty of water. So what this, I've made a note, in terms of what we know about Arrakis, we can carry plenty of water. We won't be out for long. We've got air cover as an escort. Not likely that we'll be forced down. And I've just made a note here that Leto has made a fool out of himself here to Kynes, I think. And Kynes is, and it really is a foolish thing to say. I won't take you into the desert unless you wear these really specialized survival environment suits, if you like. Come on, what about we just take water? It does reek of stupidity, doesn't it? And when Kynes, I think, Kynes stared at him. This we talk about the stairs in Dune, don't we? Seeing the water fat flesh, he spoke coldly. You never talk of likelihoods on Arrakis. You speak only of possibilities. So Leto is water fat, fleshy to Kynes. And again, it's these phrases, water fat, that we're starting to hear. The language of Arrakis, we're going to get some of the smells. We're getting the sights and sounds. But we're starting to get the language and the culture and the, I suppose, what would we call it? Colloquialisms and things like that. Water fat. I just wanted to see as water fat in the terminology of the Imperium. Water of life, water man, water discipline, water encounters, water burden. No, alas, I thought that would have been fun to read. So never talk of likelihoods. That's an absolute. If we keep pointing them out, never. So why not talk of likelihoods on Arrakis? Speak only of possibilities. Okay, it's a semantically kind of dodgy statement, I think. But again, if you remember what we were having, we had a wee chat there the last episode about Frank's ideas of absolutes, and the absolute, was it the absolute fallacy of the is it the absolute? And what was it? Sorry, I'm not quoting it very well. I was trying to recall it in my head, but it's the difference between absolutes and the random thing that happens in the moment, I think, isn't it? But there we go. So this solicits a bit of a response from Halleck. Yeah, I'll put that Halleck's a bit of a fascist here, isn't he? Maybe not. He speaks for the Duke again here. Halleck stiffened. The Duke is to be addressed as my lord or sire. And it's kind of funny sometimes that I suppose Halleck's character doesn't really initially come across as someone with that kind of big of a stick up their arse, does it? But he's given, you know what I mean? How, it's kind of banal, anal, stupid. They do the little private hand signals to desist. Our ways are new here. Gurney, we must make allowances. Which is, is a sensible thing. Rather than you must speak to me like this, you must call me that. Was it when people from different cultures meet, great allowances must be made? Isn't that it? Something like that. Yeah, you've got a bit of give and take. If you don't understand someone, try a bit harder. This kind of thing, So of course they're indebted to Dr. Kynes for his gift of these still suits. There's always a bit of a rabble with I think the Atreides here. So almost Halleck wanting to, but it settles. And Paul speaks a quotation from the Orange Catholic Bible, and of course the quotation is, "The gift is the blessing of the giver," and we're told that Paul's words ring out. Now the Fremen escorts hanging around in the shade there at the Arrakis, but at the landing field building. And this phrase, this quotation from Paul, "The gift is the blessing of the giver," makes them agitated, is what we're told. And one cries out, and there we go. This phrase, "Lisan al Gaib," the voice from the outer world. It causes a reaction from Kynes, who gives them a curt chopping signal, which makes them fall back, grumbling. And of course, Leto notices this with a most interesting kind of thing. I can't. more. I suppose more information for Leto to kind of get wrong, possibly. I am a bit tough on Leto. I have to say, I'm a bit harsh on him. Let's see. So we get a hard glare out of this, another stare over Duke and Paul. And let's see what we get. Kynes passed a hard glare over the Duke and Paul, and we get some deflection, don't we? Most of the desert natives are a superstitious lot. Pay no attention, mean you no harm. And of course, but his thoughts here are of the words of the legend. And what Paul's done, Paul's just basically ticking the boxes here, really, isn't he? They will greet you with holy words, and your gifts will be a blessing. So there we go. I get a bit vague again in terms of they will greet you with holy words, okay, and your gifts will be a blessing. So we get another bit of an assessment on Kynes here from Leto, and we're told it's based partly on Halleck's verbal report, which is brief, and that Kynes appears to be guarded and full of suspicions. And at this point, we're told it just suddenly crystallizes. Here we go. Let me see. Where am I? Oh, there we are. So Leto's assessment of Kynes suddenly crystallized. So the man was Fremen. So we've got, yes, he is. Even though he hasn't said. Kynes had come with a Fremen escort. And Leto thinks that this could be a means of them testing the limits of their new freedom to enter urban areas. And that these men seem to be an honor guard. So they have apparently the Fremen have a new freeman that they can enter urban areas. So his manner kind seems like a proud man and is accustomed to freedom. And his tongue and manner are guarded only by his suspicions. So Leto comes to the conclusion that Paul's question had been direct and pertinent. As we kind of said whenever he asked it. So he's catching up a wee bit here, maybe. And one last thing, his conclusion here. Paul's question had been direct and pertinent. Kynes had gone native. And Leto's conclusion is wrong. Kynes has not gone native in terms of what native means. It means where you're born. Kynes is a native. So there we go. He's close, but not quite the full cigar, as this, if you see what I mean. So whatever his assessment, his opinion has crystallized. It's set. He's figured him out. The man's a Fremen, but he thinks he's gone native rather than realizing that he actually is a native. He's been born here. There we go. So another assumption from Leto. And at this point, we get Halleck moving the action along. Time to get going. And of course, Leto wants to fly with Kynes sitting up front on shotgun, if you like, and Gurney and Paul are going to be in the back. So, first of all, we have this issue to deal with the security of your suits. And again, I suppose the sense of the dangerous world here is that Halleck is kind of really having to assure them that, my concern for my own welfare is as much as for yours. something happens to you, I'm dead, basically. So we have this delicate moment, as we're told. The Duke frowned, thinking, how delicate this moment. If I refuse, it may offend him. Oh, and this could be a man whose value to me is beyond measure. Yet to let him inside my shield, touching my person when I know so little about him. The thoughts flick through his mind with decision hard on their heels. We're in your hands. So he runs the problem in his hands, or in his head, sorry, and then decides, okay, we're going to let this guy inside our shield. So it's a pretty big thing for Leto, I think, in this sense that it's, living with shield technology and the way that assassins left, right, and center, this kind of thing, it is a big risk, especially when we seem to think that people can commit. There seem to be suicide troops and people like Yuri who are prepared to do anything, just to get what they're promised. So it is a big thing, Leto letting his guard down here, and it shows trust. Got plenty of armed men, he's armed himself, etc., etc. And so at this point, he lets his guard down and he asks for an explanation of the workings of the still suits from one who has lived so intimately with them. So, Dr. Kynes, it's time to give us a big lesson on the still suit. There's Chaya saying, Shalom all, Shalom Chaya, thanks for joining us, hope you're keeping well. Yeah, we're just getting going, not too much into this, I think. We're just a couple of pages in, and we're just about to have a look at the still suit. And we get an awful lot here. I'm going to run through this bit because it's a lot of techno. But I've basically got the I suppose the main details here. The still suit's described as a micro sandwich. It's a high efficiency filter and heat exchange system. It's got 3 layers. Layer number 1, the skin contact layer is porous, we're told, and perspiration passes through it, having cooled the body. It creates a near normal evaporation process. The second and third layers include heat exchange filaments and salt precipitators, because salt is reclaimed. Now, the various motions of the body do the work for the suit. Mainly breathing and some osmotic action provides the pumping force. Reclaimed water circulates the catch. It's a bit like I suppose we should all do this, it's like one of those airline things. Reclaimed water circulates to the catch pockets, and you can catch pockets, and you can drink from the little tube here out the neck. Urine and feces are processed in the thigh pads. Okay. In the open desert, the filter goes across your face. The tube is in your nostrils, and nose plugs make it a tight fit. You breathe in through the mouth filter, out through the nose tube. And a Fremen suit, as we all know, in good working order, you won't lose more than a thimbleful of moisture a day, even if you're caught in the great erg, Kynes tells them. So, there's a bit of irritation, patching, etc. Basically, the other sense that you get with this still suit and with equipment on Arrakis is that maintenance is required. You've got to maintain your stuff. And he adjusts Leto's suit for him, and it does feel better. It's tighter, less irritating. And of course, we get this. There's that but. These are Leto's thoughts on Kynes. He's a good man, but he'll have to learn to address us properly. And I've just written underneath this, Leto is a privileged dick, basically. And in that sense, do you know what? If it's all formal and all of that, etc., and the kind of structure of your military and your household requires people to refer to you by rank, etc., that kind of thing, fair enough. This guy doesn't work for him. He doesn't have to call him anything. But the thing that made me think, well, he's a bit of a dick here, really, is simply, of all the problems that this man has at the minute, he's bugged by, just because he forgets to call him sire or something like that. It's not as if he's calling him Leto baby or something like that, I don't know. His head, I suppose maybe it's just one of the many things that he's thinking about, but he'll have to learn to address us properly. Which suggests they're going to teach him how to address them properly. Always something a bit shady with the Atreides, I think. So we go now to Paul's still suit, of course. And Paul thinks back to the process of putting it on. The language here really should be starting to tell us that we really should be getting a sense that Paul Atreides is something else here. Let me just see. So this is here's some new clothes to a teenage boy. Basically, it had been an odd sensation putting on the crinkling, slick-surfaced garment. In his foreconsciousness had been the absolute knowledge that he had never before worn a stillsuit. Yet each motion of adjusting the adhesion tabs under Gurney's inexpert guidance had seemed natural, instinctive. When he had tightened the chest to gain maximum pumping action from the motion of breathing, he had known what he did and why. When he had fitted the neck and forehead tabs tightly, he had known it was to prevent friction blisters. Excuse me. So we get this little thing, and just as Kynes is going around inspecting the suits, Paul's thoughts drift back to trying to put these things on with Gurney. And it's all, again, this sense of his, how do we put it at the end of the last chapter there? Let me just, was it his sense of terrible purpose? Or have I gone back too many chapters? Let me see. Oh, probably have actually. Jump back here before I lose my train of thought. But anyway, it's one of these little things where we're jumping back a little bit in time just to see this process of Paul putting on, being so utterly familiar with the stillsuit that, again, one of these things that he doesn't know why, but he has this familiarity with things. And of course, this little thought process for us as the reader, this helps set up the surprise of Kynes, if you like. So here we go, Kynes, this little question, answer, quite fast little thing between Kynes and Paul, because he's worn it this way. It's a great scene, isn't it? I think every time this is done, it's been filmed really well. You've worn a still suit before? No. First time someone's adjusted it for you? No. Your desert boots are fitted slip fashion at the ankles. Who told you how to do that? Seemed the right way. It most certainly is. And of course, Kynes rubs his cheek and thinks of the legend. And again, it's like a little, somewhere in there in his head, he's got a little set of boxes to tick. And knows how to dress himself. As he shall know your ways as born to them. Again, Paul's just ticking all these boxes for this scientist who doesn't really look at myth and legend that way. Again, come on, we're wasting time. Let's push the action on. So they all board the ornithopter. And I think, again, how Kynes looks at things. Here he focuses on the comfort, doesn't he? As much as it's probably a military aircraft, he sees it as being very comfortable. He focused on the padded comfort of the aircraft, soft luxury of grey-green upholstery, gleaming instruments, sensation of filtered and washed air in his lungs as doors and vent fans whirred alive. So soft, he thought. So again, we've water, fat, soft. There's almost a sense of something a bit Spartan about Kynes, I suppose, in the Fremen in general, though it's not in the I suppose the ancient Greek sense. They are just in the sparse sense, I suppose. But this is almost luxury to him in the air. So we have the ornithopters rise. I take off, and I thought this was just quite a nice little sentence here. Leto fed power to the wings, felt them cup and dip once, twice. They were airborne in 10 meters, wings feathered tightly and afterjets thrusting them upward in steep, hissing climb. So you kind of do get a sense of the ornithopters in that description being a bit like a bird, I have to say. So there we go. And I think, I don't know, I think the ones in the David Lynch film kind of really look just like something quite blocky and Victorian Art Deco-y, don't they? But I thought the ones in Denis Villeneuve's film looked very good. I thought they were very, very cool, but I didn't think they looked like birds. They reminded me on dragonflies or something like that, insects of some kind rather than birds. Don't know what you think about that. But ornithopter is like a bird, I suppose. It's another one of those words, I suppose, in terms of ornithomancy, which is the divination of the future by reading bird entrails. And the word mantis, kind of magic and magicians in ancient Greece, etc. What's the word I'm looking for? Diviners, if you like. Is that it? Oracles. Yeah, it's an interesting word, and to have it involved with ornithopters and the Atreides. There's an awful lot of ornithomancy and the Atreides, I suppose, in Greek mythology. Then off they go for a wee fly southeast over the shield wall, and they're going to head to where Kynes has told the Sandmaster to concentrate the spice mining equipment. Conversation then returns to still suits again. The design and manufacture of still suits. There's this Leto commenting that speaks to a high degree of sophistication. And of course, here's this little bit. Someday I might show you a Seach factory, from Kynes. And my wee comment here is, what about sending him Idaho's head? I thought you were going to send this guy Idaho's head, just like literally a couple of minutes ago. And he says that, Leto asks about the manufacture of suits. Some suits are manufactured in some of the garrison cities, and we're told that they're inferior copies. If you value your skin on Arrakis, you wear a Fremen suit. And again, this idea that you can keep your water loss to a thimbleful a day, absolutely. If you're properly, so pretty much if if you're wearing the thing right, it's not just that you have the suit, you've got to be wearing it right. Properly suited forehead cap tight, all seals in order, major water losses through your hands. You can wear suit gloves, but the Fremen use creosote, which inhibits perspiration. And I've written down, I think that's an old, as far as I know, I think from I have to check my PhD, but I think that's an old Bedouin trick, isn't it? The idea that the parts of your body with the creosote, I thought it was across your forehead, your palms of your hands, and your armpits and your groin and your sort of the bit in behind your knees. And I thought if you rub those, you don't sweat much. Antiperspirant, doesn't it? With creosote. But there you go. So, and again, that's a little bit of a real life sort of desert technique, and we're told that the creosote bush is one of those species of plants that's been successfully brought here to Arrakis. So they can wear gloves, but they will use creosote to inhibit perspiration. That's quite interesting. So off we go across the landscape, and we get Leto looking down. And the descriptions of the landscape, I think, here are quite interesting. Tell me what you think about this. We have a broken landscape, tortured rock, black lines of fault shattering as if dropped from space, smashed sand fingers. A dry delta outlined against, what's that, darker rock. I've just put this a little bit foreboding. I think this is Leto looking down at his land, his fief, isn't it? And in terms of, it just reminded me a wee bit on, well, it's not quite the same thing, but the idea that the land and the king are one, this kind of thing. That, it's an association with, it would be the Sun King and the Earth Goddess kind of thing, if you like. But King Arthur and the Fisher King, things like that. Yeah, there's an association with the Leto in the landscape, I think, here. It's again maybe foreshadowing, broken, tortured, shattered, smashed, all of this, And we get a wee bit more of Kynes' thoughts here. as we're off flying, he sits back thinking about the water-fat flesh he had felt beneath the stillsuits. He's been, again, everybody's paying attention to each other here. They wear shield belts over their robes. They carry slow pellet stunners at their waist. They wear coin-sized emergency transmitters around their neck. Paul and Leto, he notes, are carrying knives in wrist sheaths that are well worn, suggest much use. And he sees that they're a strange combination of softness and armed strength. And he sees a poise to them totally unlike the Harkonnens. So yeah, again, I think part of this is Kynes is softening a little bit. I think he's possibly still considering sending Leto ahead, but he's giving them a chance, I think, here. He's starting to notice the differences in them and still very much views them as water fat. And yeah, here we go. So Leto's, when you report to the Emperor on the change of government, here, will you say we observe the rules? Leto asked. He glanced at Kynes, back to their course. So again, Kynes has a simplicity about him here. You left, or sorry, the Harkonnens left, and you came. Not really giving away anything, is he? And it's an interrogation, this, isn't it, from Leto, and is everything as it should be. So a lot of tension here, I think. Of course, it's brought out on the muscles along Kynes' jawline, as we observe. But this is a funny little situation here. Everything kind of is going well up until this point, I think. Momentary tension showed in the tightening of a muscle along Kynes' jaw. As planetologist and judge of the change, I am a direct subject of the Imperium, my lord. So he's getting the, just in case that's not referring to him as my lord, has miffed him. The Duke smiled grimly, but we both know the realities. I remind you that His Majesty supports my work. Indeed, and what is your work? It seems threatening, doesn't it? I think. What are, we all know the realities, the grimness. There's just something not quite right about this. Leo Keynes talking about, the Majesty supports me. I work for the Emperor. He's saying this defensively, isn't it? As if he's feeling attacked. We get a bit of a brief silence, and then we get Paul's thoughts on this. And it's Paul again. I think is quite astute here. You're pushing Keynes too hard. That's what he sees in his father. He's pushing this guy. Why? And why at this point? He's pushing this Kynes too hard. Paul glanced at Halleck, but the minstrel warrior was staring out at the barren landscape. So, of course, this back to it doesn't really turn badly, does it? But it goes back to the work of Kynes as a planetologist. And at this point, I think the whole chapter could almost be a will he send Leto ahead, if you think about it. We're told that Kynes' work is as a planetologist. He does mostly dry land biology, botany, geological work, core drilling, and testing. He says you never exhaust the possibilities of an entire planet. It's another wee absolute from him there. But he's I suppose he's a bit more on guard here. Yeah. Of course, Halleck's checking out the view. Halleck seems to be in the moment only at certain times, but I think he's always aware. It's almost like a tag team effort, I think, with Halleck and Leto sometimes. So, another very impertinent, maybe, very, very pertinent, question from Paul. Do you ever investigate the spice? Do you also investigate the spice? Curious question, my lord. And of course, Leto's saying, bear in mind, this is my fief now. My method's different from the Harkonnens. And I've just written down, not so far, really, not too much. There are differences to the Atreides and the Harkonnens, I suppose. But again, this is Leto saying, I want my cut. I don't care if you study the spice, as long as you share what you learn with us. Again, I suppose the Leto's cut. The pertinent question here again is that did the Harkonnens discourage study of the spice? Is that the question? Let me see. Yeah, sorry. The Harkonnens discouraged investigation of the spice, didn't they? Kynes stared back without answering. So you can speak, and you can speak plainly, sorry, without fear of losing your skin. And I would argue that wasn't necessarily maybe the case up until now. Those the let me see. Where are we? 30. Oh, I've jumped ahead, have I? The Imperial Court is indeed a long way off, Kynes muttered. And he thought, what does this water-soft invader expect? Does he think me fool enough to enlist with him? So again, just the water-soft invader. Water fat. It's a pejorative, isn't it? It's this term, it's contemptuous, I think. Oh dear, oh dear. Cynthia says, Leto sees the shield wall in the desert quite differently here than he did at sunrise. Also seems to be the impression of a person accustomed to cultivated spaces, a built environment. Also, if you're going to extract resources, it helps to see the impacted area as a wasteland. IOW, Leto is on his way to see spice production, so sees the environment as supporting that view. Yeah, it's I think we get a different we get different. You're right. We do get different senses of Arrakis around at this point. I suppose sometimes when we're getting it described, we do have I don't know. I think there's a lot of death associations with it. With Leto at the moment, we had the flowers in the previous chapter, all after the Dew collectors. Then we have, what was it, a shawl, and then of course the scythe. I think we'll go back a couple of chapters here, but yeah, it's quite different did at sunrise. Seems to be the impression of a person accustomed to cultivated spaces, a built environment. I kind of got the sense that this, after what we've seen of Leto up until this point, that this is him kind of happy, almost that he's out and flying a wee plane, and yeah, that kind of thing. That there's a wee bit of freedom to this, what they're doing. Going to extract it helps to see the impact there as a wasteland. Leto's on his way to see spice production, so the environment is supporting that view. I suppose the interesting thing with the spice harvesting, isn't it, that it's as long as there are worms, there'll be spice, and it's just a question of removing the spice from centrifugally from the sand, isn't it? So you could wonder what kind of environmental impact there would be from spice mining, apart from just maybe the usual exhaust fumes and that kind of thing. So this is my 5, yeah, possessive again. Speak clearly. The Imperial Court is a long way off. You're a water-soft invader. So yeah, what does he expect? Does he want me to enlist with him? This kind of thing. And yeah, the Duke chuckled. Yeah, keeping his attention on the course. There you go. He's in a better mood, isn't he? I detect a sour note in your voice, sir. We've waded in here with our mob of tame killers. Yeah, that's a good description of the Atreides, isn't it? A mob of tame killers. We expected you to realize we're not Harkonnens. And I think this is a very good bit here. Leto has this man's... Leo Keynes knows what these guys are about. I've read the propaganda you flooded into Siege and Village. Keynes said, love the good Duke. Your core of... And of course, this is too much for Gurney Halleck, isn't it? Here now. Halleck barked like a dog. He snapped his attention away from the window, leaned forward, and it's Paul that puts a hand on Halleck's arm. Gurney, the Duke said, the man's been long under the Harkonnens, and Halleck sat back. So it is a good point. I mean, basically, I think that so it's funny that that Gurney Halleck reacts that way, isn't it? Because it's just been fed right back to you. Here's a spoonful of your own crap. Basically, love the good Duke, and it makes you almost want to vomit, doesn't it? It's and who writes this stuff for Leto? Call me is it himself? And I'd say he's involved in it a fair bit, but it is. I'm not. I've read your propaganda. It doesn't mean I don't believe it. At what point do you think, honestly, that Gurney would expect him to believe it? I don't know. It's a strange little setup there. And of course, he cuts to the chase, I suppose, at this point. Your man, how it's subtle. And I think this is a paradoxical statement, but his object's plain enough. You want the testing stations, you know. If how it was subtle, maybe I would suggest that Kynes wouldn't know what they're after, and that this might have come as a surprise to him. Um, will you open the bases? Asked Leo. They're His Majesty's bases. They belong to the Emperor. They're not being used. They could be used. Does His Majesty concur? This kind of, again, little snappy, quick dialogue that we get here. And this is one of the most, I suppose, telling little statements here. Kynes darted a hard stare at the Duke. Arrakis could be an Eden if its rulers would look up from grubbing for spice. And again, doesn't answer the question. Here's a really, I just think this one's very telling. How can a planet be Eden? Eden without money? And very good response here. What is money if it won't buy you what you need? Little bit of deflection here from Kynes. It's a very, very good point, I suppose, you know, in terms of the ecological situations, everything, essentially the world's a bit of a mess at the minute, and it's a bit of a mess because of pretty much money. And economists are running the show in a sense. And money, you can't eat money, you know, doesn't keep you warm at night, that sort of thing. Whenever the I suppose whenever the shit hits the fan, really, money's worthless, isn't it? It's all a promissory note. I promise to give you, in this country, our pound sterling is sterling silver. So if you want to take your £20 note and go into a bank and hand it over to get your £20 worth of imperfect silver, you could, I suppose, but that's what you're swapping. And it's worthless, isn't it, really, at the end of the day? As long as it's worth something to some people. But I suppose that's it. What is money if it won't buy you what you need? That's a very, very good point indeed. No, the Duke thought, we'll discuss this another time. Right now, I believe we're coming to the edge of the shield wall. Do I hold the same course? It's a good point. I suppose it's a big question to talk about, isn't it? So we get a little bit of observation from a little bit. Yeah, there's a little bit of deflection, all that going on here. Let me bring this over here so I can read. We get a little bit of observation from Paul. So he looks out the window, and again, this is the ground. The same broken ground began to drop away in tumbled creases toward a barren rock plain and a knife-edged shelf. Beyond the shelf, fingernail crescents of dunes marched towards the horizon, with here and there in the distance a dull smudge, a darker blotch to tell of something not sand. Rock outcroppings, perhaps. In the heat-addled air, Paul couldn't be sure. And another question here. So as we go, are there any plants down there? Yeah, some. And we've already talked about the creosote plant. This latitude's life zone has mostly what we call minor water stealers. Yeah, water stealers, I think, is very interesting. They're adapted to raiding each other for moisture, gobbling up the trace dew. Some parts of the desert teem with life, but all of it has learned how to survive under these rigors. If you get caught down there, you imitate that life or die. That's interesting. So, of course, then Paul takes that logical step. So, therefore, you suggest that we steal water from each other. Paul asked. The idea outraged him, and his voice betrayed his emotion. And Kynes says it's done. But that wasn't precisely my meaning. You see, and here we go, my climate demands a special attitude toward water. You're aware of water at all times. You waste nothing that concerns moisture. And of course, if we haven't thought it already, the Duke does it for us there. And the Duke thought, my climate? Of course, he's probably going, my climate. So it's a very interesting set of phrases. Water is everything. Moisture is everything on this planet. And the real lesson is, well, no, that's what those plants do. But if you get caught down there, you imitate that life or die. So you observe the life that's there, and see how it gets on. And if it can survive, you can survive if you imitate it. It's an interesting point. So it's reinforcing again the nature of water on Arrakis and how precious it is. Dun, 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 dun. Well, it's a pity this little bit actually, because we could have got a wee bit of a lesson on some of the plants, but we don't. Just got a general sort of mention that they're water stealers. We get a slight change in course, come around 2 degrees more southerly. There's a blow coming from the west, we're told. The wings reflect the milky orange from the dust refracted light. And we're told Kynes, and that should steer clear of the storm's edge. So Paul suggests that it sounds, is that Paul? Let me just check here. Yeah, the sands must be dangerous if you fly into it, Paul said. Will it really cut the strongest metals? Okay, that's pretty interesting. We're learning about the environment of Arrakis. Cut metal, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? At this altitude, it's not sand but dust, we're told. The danger is lack of visibility, turbulence, and clogged intakes. And again, off we go on our road trip. Are we going to see a bit of spice mining today? Most likely. And at this point, we get quite a big paragraph here on Paul using the questions that he's been asking and the questions that other people have been asking, and his hyper awareness to do what his mother calls registering a person. So this is quite interesting. This little section is Paul's register of Dr. Kynes. I'm going to take a wee quick sip here just before we get into this. Here we go. Goodness gracious. Now, Paul's register of Dr. Kynes is this. He had Kynes. Now, this is in comparison to, I suppose, Leto having that moment where his sense of Leo Keynes crystallized in a moment just previously. So here's Paul's register of Dr. Kynes. He had him now. The tone of voice, each detail of face and gesture. There's unnatural folding in his sleeve, which means there's a knife there in an arm sheath. Once again, somebody's got a weapon past all the Atreides security, and he's sitting right next to Leto with a knife. We're told that Dr. Kynes' waist bulged strangely, and also that the desert men are known to wear a belted sash in which they tuck small necessities. So perhaps this is such a belt. It's not a shield belt. Here we go. There's a copper pin with the likeness of a hare clasped at his robe, and another smaller pin with a similar likeness. So in other words, also a hare. Paul's interrupted by Halleck grabbing the balisette. Here we go. Want to hear a tune? So I've just put, oh no, it's a Gurney song time. Gurney song, and here we go. Gurney song, let's just have a listen to it. Oh dear. Our fathers ate manna in the desert, in the burning place where whirlwinds came. Lord, save us from that horrible land. Save us, oh, save us from that dry and thirsty land. There we go. I'll stop at this just there. Let me see. He runs on to talk about being in Isle, doesn't he? Yeah, I've jumped on it. This is just a wee bit where I've just paused here to talk about hares and manna as well, because we have this little discussion about manna. Manna being that food, I suppose, in the Old Testament. I've scribbled down here. It appears a couple of times, but I think the key points about it, I suppose, in relation to Dune, in the Book of Numbers, it's described as arriving with the dew during the night. And the Book of Exodus, we're told it's collected before it was melted by the sun. So it's just, again, that sort of religious, divinely provided food stuff. So having a wee look at that on Wikipedia, actually, as to what some people believe it might have been. I thought it was quite interesting. So then, also we have the hare here. And I've just, in terms of, this is an animal that's now associated with Leo Keynes. We'll of course have the kangaroo mouse with Paul later. Let's have a wee look. Let me see. Out of curiosity, I was saying we just had a wee look. We'll look in Hyginus's constellation, Miss Lepus the hare, 122. Here we go. Right, just in relation, I don't know if any of this is useful or not, but let's see. It's not an awful lot, so it won't take long to read. Let's see. Okay, the hair that forms part of the so-called hunting scene, it'd be Orion and I suppose the Canis Major and Canis Minor, isn't it? The big dog and the little dog. Hermes is supposed to have placed this animal amongst the constellations because of its speed. It is thought to be the only four-footed creature that can be pregnant with several litters at one time, giving birth to one set of young while carrying another in its womb, according to what Aristotle reports in his treatise on animals. There we go. So that's from the epitome. From Hyginus, we have the constellation a little bit here. It says that the hare is fleeing under the left foot of Orion along the winter tropic, which passes through the lower part of its body. It sets at the rising of the archer and rises with a lion. It has one star on each ear, two spread out over its body, and one with each hind foot. There are thus 6 in all. And that's from astronomy. And then here we go. This is the mythology. So it is said that this hare is fleeing the dog of Orion in the hunt, for since Orion was depicted as a hunter. Let me see. As was written probably, they also want to show that he was hunting what he was hunting, and so placed the hare in flight at his feet. So Lapis is just underneath the constellation Orion, and you'll have the big dog to the bottom left and the little dog to the top left. With art, what do you call it? Sirius and Procyon, isn't it? Dog star and before the dog. Some say that it was Hermes who placed it there, and that it had been granted the capacity, shared by no other kind of four-footed beast, of being able to give birth to young while already being pregnant with others. But those who reject the preceding explanation say that it's hardly fitting that a hunter as mighty and renowned as Orion, whom we have already discussed in connection with the sign of the scorpion, should be portrayed in pursuit of a hare. Callimachus too comes under reproach for having said when writing in praise of Artemis that she delighted in the blood of hares and used to hunt them. They have consequently pictured Orion as confronting the bull. Okay. Now, with regard to the hare, the following tale has been handed down to us. In ancient times, there were no hares on the island of Leros, but a young man of that land who had a special fondness for the creature brought in a pregnant female from abroad and took great care of her as she gave birth to her young. After she had done so, many of his fellow citizens developed the same enthusiasm, and some acquiring hares through purchase and some as gifts, they all began to rear them. And so before long, hares came to be born in such huge numbers that the whole island is said to have been invaded by them. Since they're giving nothing to eat, they attacked the cornfields and devoured everything. Facing disaster as a result, being struck by famine, the whole body of citizens reached a common decision, and with great difficulty, so the story goes, they eventually drove the hares from the island. And afterwards, the image of a hare was thus placed in the heavens to remind people that in this life, nothing is so desirable that one cannot subsequently derive more sorrow from it than joy. Right, okay. So there's not really much there, to be honest with you. The hare plague. I thought young man whose special fondness the group brought a pregnant female from abroad and took great care of her as she gave birth to her young. So nothing really much there in that sense. I just thought it was worth having a wee look, folks, but there you go, there's a wee bit of Hyginus. But in relation to other myths, etc., let's have a wee chat. So we have, of course, mad as the March hare. That hares are associated with timidity. They're also associated with being an animal that's swift, with boxing, and of course with being a trickster. And I did have this now, that the constellation Lepus, 4 stars make a quadrilateral within it. And one of those, this is within Arabian constellation mythology, is the camels quenching their thirst. I think we had a wee chat about that before. The hare is an animal sacred to Aphrodite and Eros, which is also, we've had an association with that with Jessica and Paul before. And it's also an animal associated with the goddess Oyster, or Easter, or Esther, take your pick how you want to pronounce her. Which is where we get, I suppose, Easter from. I suppose she's a Germanic goddess of spring and fertility, I think. But within Aesop, we have the very, very famous tortoise and the hare. And of course, the hare loses its race because it's far too, I suppose, up itself about how fast it is, isn't it? It's overconfidence. So that's the one really within Greek mythology. Within Irish mythology, the hare is considered a taboo. A geese, I suppose, don't touch it, don't harm it, or you're in trouble. This kind of thing. They're seen as strong, fast, associated with the moon and magic, and I suppose the other world as well, and the Shay. Um, yeah, there's this good story of O'Sheen. So not far from me is O'Sheen's grave. My favourite story from Irish mythology would be when O'Sheen meets St Patrick and tells him where to go. It's a great story, but it's basically a story about him wounding a hare, and it runs into a thicket, and he finds a door and he follows this hare, and eventually it leads into this sort of underground throne room where there's a woman tending the wound, the same wound that he gave the hare. So they're considered shapeshifters and changelings and things like that. And I'd say probably Celtic mythology, not just Irish. But yeah, it's very bad luck to kill a hare over here. There you are. Generally because it might not be a hare that you're killing. So I don't know. I thought more to do with this the association of swiftness. As much as we were talking about constellations, I just thought the animals associated with them. Let's have a wee nosy. But there we go. Got to read a wee bit of Hyginus, didn't we? Of course, Gurney playing his music. The language from this, the burning places where whirlwinds came, horrible land, save us, dry and thirsty land. So yeah, Gurney has brought his balisette to play on the ornithopter, as you do, and I suppose the oddity of this and the people around the Duke, I suppose, causes Kynes to sort of question it and query it a wee bit. Are all your men like this? They're men of many talents, aren't they? Yeah, Gurney's a bit of a one of a kind. I like him for his eyes. I like what he sees. This kind of thing. He misses very little. Very little, and I thought again. I've made a wee note here. Both Gurney and Leto have missed Kynes' knife. And Kynes isn't too happy about this, I suppose. Halleck interposes again. For I am like the owl of the desert. Oh, I am like the owl of the desert. So we have this bird of prey that we can associate maybe with Gurney Halleck. We're sort of getting some animal motifs with individuals, aren't we? We have the kangaroo mouse with Paul. We have the owl here. We also have the owl with Gaius Helmoheim, don't we? And we have the hare now with Leo Keynes. So owls, by the way, I suppose would be associated with, depending on where you're at, I suppose they're birds associated with wisdom. What else? Oh, I suppose vigilance, and they're seen as psychopomps as well, aren't they? Birds that kind of escort the dead to the afterlife, that kind of thing. So they'd be associated with Lilith, I think. Associated with Athena as well, and they're generally, they can be. I suppose the owl is one that can be taken all sorts of ways. So we get this little bit of an encounter here at this point, and I almost, as when I was reading this, I thought, is this a wee bit of a joke? And I've quickly written, no, it's not a joke. It's Leto spots a bird, basically, spots something on the horizon. And they go through the whole motion of what is this thing, And I suppose it's a little moment of false tension, isn't it? And it turns it's just a bird, but we have all these guys checking. Yeah, it must be a pretty big bird to be picked up on their instruments like this. And let me see where we're at. So yeah, Paul's then is able to spot it in the desert. The fact about this is, I suppose, it's just a big bird, Leto, no worries. That kind of thing would have been a wee bit amusing. Like just a false flag kind of thing. But it turns out that it's actually the fact that Leto has spotted it so quickly lets Paul know that his father is essentially really hyper, has this, every sense on full alert, this kind of hyperactivity. And of course, they don't realize that the big birds are that big out this far. Probably an eagle. Many creatures adapt to this place, we're told. And the eagle within mythology, I suppose, again, is heavily associated within Greek mythology always represents Zeus, divine will, divine action. So the land seemed flat, shadow wrinkles said otherwise. And we get a question from Leto here, and it's, I suppose, a survival question. Has anyone ever walked out of the desert? And of course, stops Halleck from playing music, leans forward to catch the answer. It's an interesting question. Not from the deep desert, no. Men have walked out of the second zone, we're told, several times. Survived by crossing the rock areas where the worms seldom go. And I suppose the interesting thing about that is, really, in this sense, from my own point of reading Dune, we know Dune's a desert planet and all of this sense, but it's the first time we really get a sense of it being one gigantic desert, if you like, in the book. Has anyone ever walked out of the desert? And anywhere else you'd probably go, which one? But just, the desert. It's the desert of Arrakis. It's all desert, pretty much. So it's an interesting question. The timbre of Kynes' voice holds Paul's attention, and his senses come to an alert the way he's been trained. Let me see, 58. And we get on to the conversation about worms. Worms, I must see one sometime, the Duke said. You may see one today. Wherever there is spice, there are worms. So again, we get a little bit more information. Always to do with the spice, always. Wherever there is spice, there are worms. So on the go, time to get a wee bit of info about spice and worms. And we have, the footnote number 59 here. We've got Leto's question. Is there a relationship between the worms and spice? Really important question. One of the big mysteries of Dune. Kynes pursed his lips as he spoke. They defend the spice sands. Each worm has a territory, and as to the spice, who knows? The worm specimens examined lead us to suspect that there's complicated chemical interchanges within them. There's been traces of hydrochloric acid in the ducts, more complicated acid forms elsewhere. And I will let you have my monograph on the subject. So, and again, that's one of those things. Why would you do that? Why would you offer him this monograph if you got this sense of doom? He's been betrayed. He's been ordered to betray them, and he's even thinking about sending this guy one of his lieutenant's heads. At this point, again, there must be something he's offering to help, or maybe that he's just saying this stuff to go through the motions. I think. Oh no, I don't think. I think he's generally sort of getting to like them a bit. And of course, in regards to the worms, we're told, aren't shields a defense? And shields no defense? Asked the Duke, and we get the same response from Kynes as right at the start. Shields, Kynes sneered. Doesn't like shields, does he? Activate a shield within the worm zone, you seal your fate. Worms will ignore territory lines, come from far away to attack a shield. No one wearing a shield has ever survived such an attack. So there we go. The shield is a really bad thing in the desert. Don't turn it on. Nobody's ever walked out with one on. And that's the question. Well, how do you take a worm? And yeah, we're told that if you want to capture a worm, high voltage electrical shock applied separately to each ring segment is the only way of killing and preserving an entire worm. I've made a wee note, by the way, for those who don't know, water will do the job. There we go. So just simply water. But they can be stunned and shattered by explosives, and each ring segment has a life of its own. And just in terms of, I made a wee note of the God Emperor. We kind of figured that one out much. By the end of God Emperor, you'll know that one. So apart from atomics, no explosives are powerful enough to destroy an entire worm, and they're incredibly tough. And the next question that comes along, I've put Atreides thinking. Maybe Western man thinking, possibly. Why hasn't an effort been made to wipe them out? Pardon me. And the response is that too expensive, too much area to cover. Paul's truth sense gives awareness of tone, shadings, etc. Here, we're getting the sense that Kynes is lying and telling half truths, and it's pretty much the same throughout this actually with Kynes. And of course, Paul's thoughts here. Very important question: is there a relationship between the spice and the worms? Oh, sorry, Paul's thoughts here. I've jumped ahead. If there's a relationship between the spice and the worms, then surely killing the worms will destroy the spice. Of course, this is an internal thought. He doesn't voice this out loud. No one, it switches, but it's a very good point, and I suppose it's critical to the plot of Dune, really, isn't it? He that can destroy a thing controls a thing. This kind of thing. All do with things, isn't it? Of course, Leto wants. Nobody's ever going to have to walk out in the desert soon. We're going to have these wee transmitters on our necks, making everybody happy and safe, and we're going to set up a rescue service. I'll put this is a bit of the Presbyterian fixation at work here from Leto. No one will willingly walk out the desert soon. We'll have transmitters, a rescue service. All workers will be wearing them before long for our special rescue service. And Kynes goes, well, that's very commendable. And Leto says, well, your tone says otherwise. Of course, apart from the fact that he's having all his workers monitored, if we hadn't thought about that, and that Dune wasn't written in the information age, it'd be a bit dodgy, I suppose. But Kynes agrees with me. He says, again, there's not much use for static for these kind of things. There's static electricity built up from sandstorms, messes with all your signals. Transmitters short out, and this has been tried here before, Arrakis is tough on equipment. It's another example, again, of one of Leto's great ideas. He's decided this is a good idea. I'm going to do this, and he hasn't really asked anybody, talked to anyone, thought about it whatsoever. So I'm going to have a rescue service, and every man's going to wear one of these little things. And of course, Arrakis is harsh on equipment. Dust everywhere, sand everywhere. Not everything. All he had to do was speak to somebody like Kynes to know this. So once again, it's the second time that Leto has made a bit of a fool of himself in front of Kynes, and especially Kynes is saying this has been tried here before. Been there, some people have been here and done this. How do you not know that? I suppose is the inference there. And again, I suppose the practicality of it is if a worm is hunting you, you don't really have much time. You've got about 15 to 20 minutes, no more. And that's about it. And, essentially everything that you've just provided is old. Your information is old. I suppose it doesn't really bug Leto that much. It's but it is another example of this. And he's smart enough, I suppose, astute enough to sort of go, well, what would you advise? And this little back and forth between Liet and Leto, arguably the two men who consider the planet theirs. What would you advise? The Duke asked. You ask my advice? As planetologist, yes. You'd follow my advice? If I found it sensible. Very well, my lord. Never travel alone. And this is Kynes' simple piece of advice. Never travel alone. If I could ask, what would you do if you just don't go alone? That's it. Have company. What if you're separated by a storm and forced down? So Halleck presents this kind of theoretical. Isn't there anything you could do? Anything covers much territory. And so again, they're really trying to get Kynes to give them a bit of info here, aren't they? Would you share with us? And he's not really doing it because I think it's almost the nature of the questions. But again, Paul cuts to the chase, doesn't he? What would you do? Which is really what everybody wants to know. What if you're the guy, you're the expert, in terms of walking out of a desert? What would you do? It's the best way to get the answer out of him, isn't it? And we get another hard stare at the boy from Liet before turning his attention back to the Duke. So here's if you're downed and you're ornithopter in Arrakis, here's what you do, courtesy of Liet Kynes. You protect the integrity of your still suit, no matter what. If you're outside of a worm zone or in rock, you stay with the ship. But if you're down on open sand, get away from the ship fast. At least 1,000 meters should be enough. Hide beneath your robe and hope that the worm gets the ship and not you. And then basically wait for the worm to leave. You can try to walk out, walk softly. And again, we're getting an awful lot of lessons here actually all at once. And I suppose avoid drum sand, avoid tidal dust basins. Head for the nearest rock zone. There are many such zones. So within this, we've got information about worms and how they defend their territories, etc. How to hunt and preserve a worm, how to kill them. We've got the workings of the still suit, a little bit about plants and animals. Goodness gracious. Yeah, fathers are manna to the desert. We've had a little bit. There's an awful lot here in this, and again, the sense. By the way, we also have that sense of the beginnings of that sense of the Fremen plan to turn Arrakis into an Eden. Excuse me. We've learned about planetologists and creosote. And yeah, there's an awful lot here, I have to say. But this again, another little bit of this ecological lessons. What's drum sand? Gurney's question here. Condition of sand compaction. Slightest steps sets it drumming, and worms always come to that. And again, Leto goes with the other term. So we've heard drum sand and we've heard tidal dust basins. So Leto asks, okay, what's that? Again, they're depressions and deserts that have filled with dust over the centuries. Some so vast that they have currents and tides. All will swallow the unwary who step into them. Just for that, we get another Halleck song. Dear. Wild beasts of the deserts do hunt there, waiting for the innocents to pass. Oh, tempt not the gods of the desert, lest you seek a lonely epitaph. The perils of the... And he broke off, leaned forward. Dust cloud ahead, sire. I see it. So there we go. That's actually Gurney interrupting himself, which is nice. Steve Miller says, the idea of never travel alone foreshadows Kynes' death when he hallucinates company. That's a good point. It's his father, isn't it? If I can remember. I'm really looking forward to getting to that bit, actually. That's going to be fun to take apart. Oh, no, it's, yes, hallucinating. And also, particularly, really want to get to that little bit in the first appendix where we get to see, I suppose, Pardo Kynes. But yes, it does foreshadow Kynes' death a wee bit, doesn't it? Based on this advice, the area of the shield wall, so evocative of destruction and torture, is actually a preferred place for isolated humans. Lots of rocks, not open sand. Absolutely, the safety of the shield wall, isn't it? And it's a natural rock defense. I'm quite surprised to see it in the film as a kind of an artificially made wall. So yeah, again, and isn't it funny how a lot of coming from, I suppose, I wonder what Halleck's probably from Geary Prime. He seems to know an awful lot of desert type songs, doesn't he? So we see a dust cloud ahead. And of course, this is the sign of spice mining. The rolling yellow cloud low on the desert surface, approximately 30 kilometers ahead of them. And this is where we have one of the factory crawlers on the surface, and that means it's looking for spice. If it's on the surface, we're told it's on the spice. And so a little bit more about, I suppose this is the culmination of the road trip. We've been flying out here to visit this factory crawler and see what's happening. Again, we're going to get a bit of insight into spice mining and how it goes. Dust cloud is the vented sand expelled after the spice has been centrifugally removed. And there's no other cloud quite like it, we're told. There are 4 aircraft, about 4 spotters, and we're told that they watch for worm sign. What's worm sign? Worm sign is the sand wave that moves towards the crawler in the wake of the giant worms, I suppose. They use seismic probes on the surface too to detect them, and that the worms sometimes travel too deep for the wave to show. Kynes informs them that there should be a carryall wing around, but I don't see it. And Gurney, again, asking, do the worms always come? And the answer is always. Again, that mimics and kind of imitates that, what we heard earlier, that always. Where was it? Just there on back. This is such a big chapter, I have to say. Let's make finding stuff again a bit awkward. Bear with me a second, folks. Yeah, wherever there is spice, there are worms. Always. Back a few pages for that. So we get another question from Paul. And as we go, we're going to keep learning all about this stuff. How big is a worm's territory? And interestingly, I think the child, the child, these the way Paul's referred to here at this point, and how Paul will, I suppose, be introduced in a wee bit by Gurney. The child kept asking adult questions. I suppose, and the answer that he gives him, I suppose, hang on a second. Have I scribbled? Where am I? I've lost my place. Sitting on, looking at the wrong footnote. There we go. Happens with my bad handwriting. How big an area did each worm stake out? The child kept asking adult questions. This depends on the size of the worm, we're told. What's the variation? Big ones may control 300 or 400 square kilometers. Small ones, and of course, were cut off. The Duke kicked on the jet brakes. The ship bucked as its tail pods whispered to silence. Stub wings elongated, cupped the air. The craft became a full thopter as the Duke banked it, holding the wings to a gentle beat, pointing with his left hand off to the east beyond the factory crawler. Is that worm sign? And again, Kynes looks across the Duke to peer into the distance. Paul and Halleck crowd together looking in the same. They're all looking for this thing. And their escort, by the way, the action that Leto has done has meant that the escort has flown on past them. And again, Paul has noted this. So, and they've continued on and turning back. Right, so the factory crawler is now at this point about 3 kilometers away, I think. Let me see if I can get that right. 75. Hmm. 76. There we go. Factory car, elongated mount in motion, a cresting of sand. It reminded Paul of the way a big fish disturbed the water when swimming just under the surface. And again, I suppose I just made a wee note that Herbert had a big interest in fluid dynamics, and a lot of the research that he did on, excuse me, they shifted the moving sands. This article that he was going to write about barrier sands, etc., kind of led him into research on deserts and so on. And I think particularly stuff that he did for the Dragon in the Sea, he saw a big correlation between fluid dynamics, the way I suppose in the oceans, I think, and in the large deserts of the Earth, he thought them to be very similar. So it's a worm, and it's a big one. Worm sign warning. And of course, again, this is probably Leto has picked this up because he's a bit hyper. So, is it a worm? Big one. Well, it's a worm sign warning. And down at the crawler, of course, they're wanting to know who's calling. They all seem, Halleck notes that they seem pretty calm. There's a giant worm on the way, but they're fine about it. Worm sign warning, acknowledge please. Who calls? Again, they seem pretty calm about unlisted flight north and east of you, about 3 kilometers. Yeah, they're about 3 kilometers away. Worm sign is on intercept course. Your position, estimated contact, 25 minutes. So we kind of have our tick-tock time running down, bit of tension. Here we go. This is going to become a rescue mission. It's a sharp estimate who's on that flight. And Halleck had his harness off and surged forward between Kynes and the Duke. Is this the regular working frequency, Kynes? Yes. Why? Who'd be listening? Just the work crews. Cuts down interference. Well, This is danger. Who gets bonus credit for that spot over? So what we have is a situation where Gurney decides that they'll let the workers know that Duke Leto's on board and that he's done this. He's spotted the worm, and this is to do with the fact that there is a bonus credit paid to anybody who gets the first spot based on the amount of melange in the crawler factory whenever they see a first worm site. So the bonus is based on the spice load. And of course, this is Gurney Halleck at work here. The credits to Duke Leto Atreides. And of course, they thank him. And we're told Gurney is talented at public relations. It's a moment of opportunity for Halleck. And I've made a wee note here, sorry, that Halleck operates in the now here. He's literally, this is a seize the day, seize the moment kind of thing. And of course, it goes kind of contrary to what we're thinking. Especially the way they behave with security. But the way that Halleck explains it, Kynes is puzzled. He says Halleck tells him it lets the men know that the Duke is concerned for their safety. And here's the way that Halleck runs it in his head: the word will get around. It's a working frequency. It's not likely that Harkonnen agents are going to be listening in, and that they have a pretty strong force here with them. So therefore, it equates to a good risk, and it's an opportunity for a bit of propaganda, isn't it? A bit of public relations, shall we say. And this has a lot to do with how the Atreides, I suppose, are going to try and influence Kynes ultimately, isn't it? Or rather, it's the thing about the Atreides that Kynes is going to carry away from this. So the carryall will come along and lift the crawler factory away. That's what it's supposed to do. What if it's wrecked? Some equipment is generally lost, we're told. So Kynes tells them to get in close to the crawler, and they'll find this interesting. And we're going to have a look at the crawler factory. So the sand is spewing out, and we're told it looks like a metal and plastic monster. Great tan blue beetle. Many wide tracks extended on arms around it, and it has a giant inverted funnel snout placed into the dark sand. So again, like some giant insect or beetle or anteater or something like that. And Paul studies the cloud that's coming out of the factory versus, I suppose, the worm sign. Let me just check that. Yeah, Paul studied the yellow cloud belching from the crawler's pipe vents, looked out over the desert at the approaching worm track. So keeping his mind. They're talking about calling in the carryall and the fact that the wings are on different frequencies. And the question is, why aren't there two carryalls? And Kynes isn't able to answer. I think he's cut. You don't have enough cut off. Speaker up there with an angry voice. Any of you see the wing? He isn't answering. So our tension's starting to build. We're getting a bit of a sense of urgency here. Goodness gracious. Ho. Right. The speaker is angry. Can anyone see? Not answering. They're told to report in by the numbers. And a lot of this, I suppose, we just run through it. We get these questions repeated. There's no sign of the wing carryall. And again, why don't we have two carryalls for each factory? Kynes' answer, you don't have enough extra equipment. Therefore, and again, I suppose Paul says, more reason to protect the equipment that we have. Now, the question, I suppose, is, has the carryall been forced down? And I think I suppose it's the Atreides kind of ignorance of what's going on. Why didn't these spotters see what happened to the carryall? Well, they're not looking at the sky. They're looking at the ground for worm sign. That's where their attention is focused. So it starts to make sense for us a bit. It gives us a logic to how the mining's done. Why? Yeah, a carryall. If it's so important, why have one thing? Surely you should have two, a backup. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, if a worm coming along is so dangerous, you really wouldn't want to risk it. You would use two, wouldn't you? You just cut down your production, make sure that your factory's got out okay. Hmm. So all the more reason to protect what we have. Has the carry-all been forced down? Spotters watch the ground for worm sign where their attention is focused. So it's time for Leto to do his thing. Rescue mission time. They've almost a full load of spice and they don't want to leave it for the worm. Of course, we get that. Damn the spice! We can always get more. So basically, at this point in the action, a lot of action going on here, I suppose, not too much of the rest of it. But at this point, they basically chuck out all the seats, the shield generators, etc. Anything they can do to get a bit more space for the men to get on board. And our time keeps whittling down as well. We're at 9 minutes. The tension's building as we're approaching the arrival of the worm. And at this point, we get a bit of the crawler was silent now. No sound spouting from its vents, only a faint mechanical rumble issued from it, becoming more audible as the Duke opened his door. Immediately, their nostrils were assailed by the odor of cinnamon, heavy and pungent. So there's that big, heavy, pungent cinnamon smell of spice. I'm told that the thopters that they're on board are dwarfed by this crawler factory, and they seem to be like gnats beside a warrior beetle. So again, gives us a sense of the size of these things. And rather oddly, the men don't come out. And we're told that this is because they're hoping that the carry-all will come. And basically, Leto's commands: get rid of the shield generators. We're not leaving any man for that monster. A command from your Duke: on the double, I will cut the crawler in half with a lasgun. So this gets everybody out. I said they're hoping to kind of work to the last minute. Really, if it's some kind of silly mistake, then they can save the crawler. So we're told the tall man in a patched working robe is the last out. He seems to be in charge, and he helps pair up the men to the ship. Pairs up the men to the ships. Sorry. And as he finishes counting off his crew, he and 3 men rush over to join Leto, etc. Kynes says, "I hear the worm, but don't see it." And then the others, again, one of these, maybe his senses are more attuned. The others hear it after him, and we're told it has an abrasive slithering, which seems about right, really, for a giant worm on sand. So as the craft are lifting off, it reminds Leto of the jungles on Caladan. And the carrion birds, he has this image of carrion birds lifting away from the carcass of a wild ox. And just put death imagery. And it's a little bit just of all the things that this reminds him of. That's where he goes. So it shows you his mood is a bit still morbid, I think. The spice workers would get on board the ornithopter, and Paul can smell the perspiration of fear. And he actually notes how poor their neck adjustments are on their still sits. He files this information for future action, which again gives us a little bit of a sense of Paul being a mentat, Joseph saying, "Have a great show, everyone. Catch up there." Thank you, Joseph. It's a strange one, this chapter. I think that the start of it's kind of interesting to talk about. As we got into this, kind of the action bit in these books tends to be a wee bit strange, I find. That it doesn't flow quite as well. But maybe it's just I was getting a bit weary of it because it being such a big chapter. So, again, it's a little bit of a mentat thing there. He files this information for future use. Father should order tighter stillsuit discipline. The sense of how important water is really getting there to Paul. The worm amongst us, blast off, people shouting, but Leto frowning, going, "Well, we've almost got 3 minutes according to our estimates. Is this the case?" Dr. Kynes saying basically that's pretty much it, almost exactly, and notes that a cool one, this Duke. So he's it's kind of coming hang around a bit to see. I think the idea is just really wants to see a worm. What's the rush if I've got 3 minutes? And of course, they have to take off. The ship's pretty heavy. Oh, hang on. I'm way ahead. There we go. Do. So the takeoff press the Duke and Kynes deep into their seats, compressed the people in the rear. Kynes watched the way the Duke handled the controls, gently, surely. The Thunderer was fully airborne now, and the Duke studied his instruments, glanced left and right at his wings. She's very heavy, sire, Halleck said, well within the tolerances of the ship. You didn't really think I'd risk this cargo, did you, Gurney? And I suppose at the end, I think this is a nice wee bit here. This is Leto being a bit of a hero, isn't it? He's a bit of a smoke me a kibber, I'll be back for breakfast kind of guy. He's come in, organised. Let's save everyone. We're not leaving anyone behind. What? How long have we got? Can we hang? Okay, let's go. This kind of thing. He comes across as very cool, collective, and heroic. I would imagine, certainly to the workers on board the crawler factory. And it's good to see him this way, I think. I think it would be pretty bad to have Leto just being a bit crap at everything, wouldn't it? It would be hard to actually to make his... It would be difficult for his character to be realistic at that point, I think, wouldn't it? So he banks the craft in a long, easy curve. He's not really getting out of there in a hurry. A little bit more tension to be built up from the reader. And we get some observations from Paul, who's crushed into a corner beside a window. He notes that the worm sign had broken off about 400 meters from the crawler, and now there appeared to be turbulence in the sand around the factory. The worm is now beneath the crawler, Kynes said. You're about to witness a thing few have seen. And yes, indeed. So here is this description. So it's a bit of a payoff. It's almost Leto really wants to see a worm, doesn't he? And he's about to see one. We get flecks of dust shadowed the sand. The crawler tips down and to the right, and then a gigantic sand whirlpool forms to the right of the crawler. Faster and faster, sand and dust fill the air for hundreds of meters around. And then they saw it. The wide hole emerged, sunlight flashes on glistening white spikes within it. The hole's diameter, we're told, is over 2 times the diameter of the crawler factory. And the whole that machine itself slides into the hole. And there's a billow of dust and sand, and then the hole pulled back. Gods, what a monster! Muttered a man beside Paul. I was thinking of Patrick Stewart saying that line. Gods, what a monster, and it's got all our flogging spice, so they're not happy. And of course, Leto, someone is going to pay for this, the Duke said. I promise you that. By the very flatness of his father's voice, Paul sensed the deep anger, and he found that he shared it. This was a criminal waste. So we keep making wee notes about Leto's anger, how it's been building, overwhelming him, being contained by him, etc. Anger's a problem for him, isn't it? But in this case, Paul shares his father's anger. It's a criminal waste. In the silence that follows them, we have Kynes muttering his prayer, I suppose. Bless the Maker and his water, Kynes murmured. Bless the coming and going of him. May his passage cleanse the world. May he keep the world for his people. And Leto wants to know, what are you saying? And he shuts up. It's one of these things where a lot of people, I think particularly in the film, they all speak out loud as if thinking nobody can understand them. But in this case, usually I suppose in Dune it's their internal thoughts. But in this case, we have him speaking out loud. And I think sometimes there's something a wee bit funny about the Fremen and Kynes and so on, that don't seem to be very good at keeping secrets. And of course, if we have a wee look at this, I suppose, breaking it down, we have, let me see, where do we get those? Terms of the Imperium. If we hit the terms of the Imperium, Maker gives us Shai-Hulud, the sandworm of Arrakis. The sandworm of Arrakis. I have to say, one of the things I really did like about I keep nearly want to say the new David Lynch film, about the new Denis Villeneuve's Dune movie. I really like the Imperial Herald, who turns up and reads it, in that kind of very singy lilty type voice. I thought that was it. He was excellent. He's only on the screen for a few seconds, but I thought very impressive. And he has a very good voice on him, whoever the actor is. I really thought that was one of the excellent parts of that. Let's have a look. Shai Hulud. Maker will take us to Shai Hulud. I know we've had the look at this before. So the sandworm of Arrakis, the old man of the desert, old father eternity, grandfather of the desert. Significantly, this name, when referred to in a certain tone or written with capital letters, designates the earth deity of Fremen hearth superstitions. Sandworms grow to enormous size. Specimens longer than 400 meters have been seen in the deep desert and live to a great age unless slain by one of their fellows or drowned in water, which is poisonous to them. Most of the sand on Arrakis is credited to sandworm action. It was just in particular, I suppose, before we go any further, there's three terms there. The old man of the desert, old father eternity, grandfather of the desert. I think that there would be certain analogues for them. Certainly the old man of the sea, who can be one of a number of people, but it's Proteus is the old man of the sea. Isn't it? Sometimes Egyptus, isn't it? Old father eternity and God, these kind of terms, they're kind of lining up with kind of Kronos and Uranus, I suppose. Must have a wee look at that. But certainly the old man of the sea, if we swap out desert for sea, if you see what I mean. I thought just those wee terms of Shai Hulud might be interesting to have a look at. Proteus, of course, is a shapeshifter. To be protean, I suppose, in your form. He's an interesting character. Leto asks what Kynes is saying, but he stays quiet, of course. We get the man staring at Kynes. Again, we get this kind of, Liet. Is it the item here, I think, don't they? Which they seem to keep doing. Again, they're not very subtle. Every time they hear a certain word, they reveal all out loud. Yeah, here we are. Kynes remained silent, but Paul glanced at the men crowded around him. They were staring fearfully at the back of Kynes' head. One of them whispered, "Liet." Kynes turned, scowling. The man sank back, abashed. And I put pretty much at this point, it should be obvious that Liet is Dr. Liet Kynes. And I've written a note here. How is Liet being the same person as Kynes in any way a secret is beyond me. Paul's quote, "The gift is the blessing of the giver," now applies to the worm. It has given the planet and the Fremen a gift, cleansing the world of the spice harvester. That's an interesting point. I suppose the question that makes me want to ask Cynthia is, who has given Arrakis the gift of the worm? One mystery leads to another, I think. But yeah, that's a good point. Yes. I suppose that the machines that we keep seeing metal are often the poison snooper was described kind of like a spider upside down dead as well, wasn't it? There is something, I don't know what it was about, insect like metallic and plastic, I suppose, about these machines that we see. Gifts that now applies to the worm. I suppose that, and the worm gives lots of gifts, doesn't it, really? Excuse me. So as I said, sometimes I think these people are obviously, I think they're still human and flawed, no matter how far in the future we go. And I think sometimes Herbert just has a wee bit of fun with some things, but you must wonder, how is any of this a secret? How is Liet Kynes not known? How do people not know Dr. Kynes is not the same person as Liet? They seem to want to just give it away at every opportunity. I think that's all. Another of the rescued man began coughing, dry and rasping. Presently he gasped, "Curse this hellhole." And I was wondering, actually, was that a wee bit of a diversion, possibly? So the tall man gives that who's wearing the patchwork outfit earlier, gives thanks to Leto. But it's to you we give thanks for our lives. We were ready to end it there until you came along. Quiet, man, and let the Duke fly his ship, Halleck muttered. And we get Paul glancing at Halleck, and you think kind of that's really probably not the way he wants this bit of propaganda to go. But it's actually that the Duke is under a bit of strain by the looks of it. And you think part of the propaganda thing would be to allow them to thank the Duke, that kind of thing, or this kind of idea. Tension wrinkles at the corner of his father's jaw, and I suppose the point that Paul makes here. This is the thing I was talking about earlier that I think is very interesting. He too had seen the tension wrinkles at the corner of his father's jaw. One walked softly when the Duke was in a rage. Is that Paul? Is that everybody? If you know what I mean. And it's not anger. This is a different word. It's rage. So we have all movement on the sand. Where the worm had gone, the crawler had gone. There are now two figures moving north, and they almost appear to glide across the sand, hardly a lifting of a dust to show that they were there. And so the question is, who are these two guys? And two Johnnies who came along for the ride, sir, said the tall Dune man. Why wasn't anything said about them? The chance they took, sir, the Dune man said. Now we get the point. Leto is going to send a ship to rescue these people. I suppose Kynes again trying to sort of say probably not much good. Likely when the ship gets here, there'll be no one to rescue. They were right beside where the worm came up. How did they escape? So the sides of the hole, this is what Kynes tells them, the sides of the hole cave in and make the distances deceptive, which is not an answer. And again, Halleck, we're wasting time, we're wasting fuel, moves the action on a bit. You waste fuel here, sire. I agree. So off they go, heading out towards the shield wall. And we get Paul's thoughts here again. The Dune man and what Kynes had said, it all starts to ping. He sensed truths. And it's been kind of increasing, I suppose. The last time he talked about half lies. This time it's outright lies. The men on the sand glided across the surface so surely. And that their actions appear calculated to prevent the return of a worm. They're Fremen. Who else could they be? And in that sense, thinking about what's been said, that's why they can be left out of your worries. That's why they're in no danger. It's because these people know how to live here. And more importantly, from Paul's point of view, I suppose, from ours, Paul notes that they know how to outwit the worm. And that's kind of quite interesting whenever we think of worms as being their god, I suppose. And as we pointed out, the Fremen's god is also a form of transport for them. Jaya is saying, only by imitating the desert do you survive. So equipment mimics nature. Yeah. I suppose we're starting to find that, aren't we? That there's things that we're learning and can develop from animal species and plants that that we have, that we can actually make technologies based upon the wonderful things that animals and plants can do. And it's a bit sad that then we start to realize that animals becoming extinct. Is it those wee gloves with the wee things that mimic the geckos? Little claws or whatever they would call it. It says it climbs up walls. Things like that. We can learn so much from nature. And I suppose nature tends to do it better, doesn't it? Excuse me. So, yeah, Paul's question straight away, I pretty much sensing that doesn't say it the front, but why were there Fremen on the crawler? What's this all about? Kynes worlds. We talk about these kind of little people who whirl and the way people move within the book. It's like a whirlwind. Who be this lad? This is it. I think this is really interesting. But the tall Dune man turned wide eyes on Paul, blue within blue within blue. Who be this lad? He asked. Halleck moved to place himself between the man and Paul and said, "This is Paul Atreides, the ducal heir." And I just thought that's an introduction. Here you go. Who is? It's kind of a who was that masked man moment. But it's simply put that this person cannot be dismissed as a boy or a child anymore, especially in the company of the adults in the ornithopter. Paul is just coming across as the most intelligent, most insightful person here. And this idea that this is a boy, it's just getting beyond Kynes, and it's starting probably to push him towards his messianic ideas, isn't it? This is Paul, and that's a way to get your, this is Paul Atreides, the ducal heir, you know. Why do you say Fremen? Another one of these little back and forths, I suppose, which I think is quite funny. I do like these little back and forth sort of conversations. Why, says he, there was a Fremen on our Rumbler, the man asked. They fit the description, Paul said. Kynes snorted. You can't tell Fremen just by looking at them. He looked at the Dune man. You, who were those men? Friends of one of the others, the Dune man said. Just friends from a village who wanted to see the spice sands. Kynes turned away. Fremen. And I think it just comes across as such an obvious falsehood. But and again we have this but, he was remembering the words of the legend, the Lisan al-Gaib shall see through all subterfuge. And I think that's pretty much, yeah, you're being deceitful here. And it's Fremen. It's a deflection. It's an attempt to outright lie, I think, between him and the tall Dune man. But he's got them, and you can tell a Fremen surely by the way they look. As much as he still goes on with the lie, doesn't he? Really, they'll be dead now, most likely, young sir. The Dune man said, "We should not speak unkindly on them," and this bit I think is kind of interesting. It's almost, whoa, what's going on here? But Paul heard the falsehood in their voices, felt the menace that had brought Halleck instinctively into guarding position. So whenever they're going, oh, those guys would be dead now, most likely, young sir, we should not speak unkindly on them. It's a kind of a religious thing that's changed the subject, isn't it, in a way? But there's something wrong about the tone. There's menace in their voices. And it's not just that Paul picks it up. Paul hears the lie, the falsehood in their voices. But Gurney goes, pating dong, I'm ready to fight. It's what is it that's so... And I suppose it says a lot about Gurney, doesn't it? That Gurney doesn't really react when things aren't too important, but he does when there's even the subtlest hint of danger here. And it is a subtle hint of danger. Paul spoke dryly. And again, the thing about moisture for the dead, we're told that they be dead now. He's not giving anything for these men in that sense. A terrible place for them to die. And without turning, Kynes said, when God hath ordained a creature to die in a particular place, he causeth that creature's want to direct him to that place. And of course, a religious quotation, probably wondering, is it from the Orange Catholic Bible? And again, it gets a hard stare from Leto at Kynes. Leto turned a hard stare at Kynes. What are Leto's wants? So in relation to this quotation, when God hath ordained a creature to die in a particular place, he causes that creature's wants to direct him to that place. And that, I suppose Leto responds to that. Leto's wants have directed him to Arrakis, haven't they? And Kynes, as much as he gets a hard stare at Kynes, Kynes also gives a stare back at Leto, and he is troubled by a fact that he has observed. And this is it. This Duke was concerned more over the men than he was over the spice. He risked his own life and that of his son to save the men. He passed off the loss of a spice crawler with a gesture. The threat to men's lives had him in a rage. A leader such as that would command fanatic loyalty. He would be difficult to defeat, and against his own will and all previous judgments, Kynes admitted to himself, I like this Duke. And he likes him. Yeah. And that's the end of our chapter there. What a chapter that was. That was a bit heavy. But at the end of that, we do, after Leto having, I suppose, the propaganda from the book hasn't really matched up, we've been getting a sense of disappointment about Leto, haven't we? Probably in the same way that Paul has been heading towards that realization that Leto's just a man. But this chapter, and he's a bit of a in it at points, but this chapter really has given us a Leto moment, hasn't it? It's allowed him to be the commanding hero. The hero is the head of a military house or family, if you like, and it's not perfect. But yeah, his attitude, it's his observations that kind of spot the worm sign. And although he's a bit hyper and he's a bit full on with Dr. Kynes, not really dealing with Kynes the way he should, I suppose. At the end of the day, he's a bit of a hero in this chapter. And it's as much as Paul is observing, Gurney's along for the ride, kind of. It really is an interchange between Leto and Leot. And yeah, Leot Kynes gets to see Leto be a bit of a hero rather than just some selfish head of a private house, if you like, Goodness gracious. But that was a thick. And in terms of making the notes, I suppose, in terms of getting a lot of idea, there's just a lot of exposition about spice mining, the worms. There's an awful lot in here, and maybe still suit. All of the explanations of the still suit are here, and spice. So a bulk of the things that we've been getting introduced to in Arrakis, or about Arrakis, sorry, a lot of them have been here. And we also have this really important character, Leo Keynes, as well, the planetologist, the ecologist, but who prefers the term planetologist, and of course talks about doing dryland botany, etc. And we know that this book, Dune, is dedicated to dryland ecologists everywhere, wherever they may be, in whatever time they work. This effort at prediction is dedicated in humility and admiration. So there's an awful lot here. We've been getting bits and pieces as we go. We've been getting little bits of lessons, and it almost feels like we've graduated and gone out on the field trip today. Time to put a lot of our theory into practice, if you like, both as readers of the story and as we follow along Leto and his family. But there's a practicality, if you like, and I think in a funny sense, what we were saying about Leto kind of having great ideas, but them being really impractical, and he hasn't thought them out, and he hasn't taken advice. It's kind of based on what he knows, I suppose, of Dune and Arrakis. And as readers, we've kind of got to know X amount up till now, and we've talked about some of the precautions that the Atreides have and how they're useless. That this planet is different. It messes with equipment. It messes with all sorts of things. And water is really, really important. I think it's a really good and it does allow Leto to be a hero, I think, because he needs to be in some way, other than just otherwise. Up to this point, he's just someone who's been painted. He's Kim Jong Il, isn't it, or Kim Jong Un, whichever one it is. Kim Jong. Just propaganda. Isn't he wonderful? Isn't he brilliant? Isn't he amazing? No, he's not. But he's just a man. But here he has his moment, I suppose, and it's a heroic moment, and it's still filled with kind of misgivings and death imagery and his sense of doom and gloom. But he's going about his business, and I think the only other thing I would say about Leto is that Kynes ends up with this fact that the Duke is concerned with his men, moreover with his men than he is with spice. It might be true, but at the same time, he can't mine the spice without men. And in terms of what people represent, it's about their value to him. And we hear this when he talks about Kynes, that this man might have an enormous amount of value to me. And clearly Kynes does, because he knows stuff that's going to save Atreides' lives, etc. Let's have a wee. I'll get a sip of juice. I've been talking for ages. I'm gonna have a look at your comments, folks. And we've got the banquet scene next, don't we? Which is that's a chapter and a half, isn't it? So I think the chapter shows that the Fremen were primarily won over to Paul by this experience of Kynes, not Idaho's timeless Stilgar. Leto wanted the Fremen to judge them by Idaho. But Idaho wasn't there long enough, perhaps, and the upcoming Spice Spear incident shows that Idaho has faults. Yeah. We talked about that. I think it also highlights that I think the choice of Idaho for the upcoming Spice Spear incident, as you would say, as we would put it, is Howitt's decision. So I think it shows that he has faults. Yeah, the Atreides are riddled with faults. Kynes' upcoming instruction to support Jessica and Paul will influence the Fremen. Absolutely. It is an important bit here. And actually, how the Atreides have behaved will have influenced Kynes. Absolutely. And up until this event, I suppose, and it really does. And they're all in this one together, if you know what I mean. They're all, it's kind of Kynes and the Atreides, they're all stuck in this little, there's nowhere really he can go in regards to it. He's along for the ride, and I don't think he really wants to be there. But it gives him an opportunity for them to observe the Atreides up close and personal, and to note that they're not like the Harkonnens. And as much as there's aspects of Leto's character that we don't like, Leo Keynes is a hardened killer as well. As much as he's a scientist, he happily murders people. But that's just the nature of the universe, I suppose. But yeah, I think the character shows that the Fremen were primarily won over to Paul by this experience of Kynes. Yes, I'd agree. And as I said, it has payoff later. And I think in particular, what you're saying, that really the banquet scene also solidifies that, doesn't it? Really, it actually sets goodness. I'm looking forward to getting to the banquet scene, I have to say. It's been a wee while since I've read it, and I have to have a wee look at my video again on it. The banquet scene really does kind of solidify or show the opportunities for certain alliances with the Atreides, and it also really demonstrates, I think, that if they had a bit of time, if they could have got the time that they needed, the breathing time, if they could have dug in the right way, that the alliances were there, that Leto's plan could have worked, that Arrakis could have been that place. Certainly with the Fremen, the smugglers, etc., etc., Oh, good. I thought that one would take me forever. I had 111 footnotes there, and some of it just that bit where I'm flying a helicopter. It's just what can I really talk about that other than we don't want to be just repeating stuff on the page, really, do we? But there's been plenty there today, and it's just, I think, a very exposition heavy. It's a lot of this is for the verisimilitude of the world, how well the reality of this world works, if you like. The spice mining, the desert, the worms, the ecosystem of it, fundamental. So that fundamental to it all, I suppose. So we have an awful lot of information there, and it's a good little bit of adventure. It's a little trip out, isn't it? And it has that feeling of adventure. And of mystery and excitement, and the pearl of great wisdom, all of this kind of thing, and the giant worm, and they've again kind of got a glimpse of it from I suppose looking at the circle of the mouth down below and its teeth and so on. But so we haven't quite seen it ourselves. There's a little bit of mystery to it as well. So yeah, it's been a chance for them to get out, and it's only this day 2 on Arrakis, really, and I think Kynes' character in particular here is presented really well. He's meant to, I suppose he's almost another one of these Janus facing things, isn't it? And as a father, because he's Chani's father, and he'll be, I suppose, not exactly a surrogate father to Paul Atreides, but in terms of information that he passes on to him, and the fact that Paul marries his daughter, Kynes is a really interesting character, very important character to Herbert. And very important that this character behaves a certain way, comes across as a certain way, because he's also a hero And there's a big problem with Leo Keynes, and a big problem with Leo Keynes' ideas about ecology. Um, and it's a major key thing to this plot. It's a major. Oh, that was terrible English, wasn't it? It's a really important factor in regards to how Frank wants to get his ideas of ecology. Um, I suppose the other sort of side ideas that go with that, the things to do with hydraulic despotism, this kind of thing. Keynes represents everything that's bad about Western man's thinking in relation to ecology. And my biggest gripe over the new film is the Keynes character and what's been done to him in terms of the ecological message, which has been watered down. And it's arguably the thing that Dune is most famous for. But there you go. But that was a bit of a handful, I have to say. And it is a good chapter. And I think this is one of those scenes. I said I thought this was one of the way this was filmed in Denis Villeneuve's Dune. I thought was excellent, really good. It's got that sense of tension and time moving, the pace of it, and I think it was done really well in David Lynch's Dune, and I think it was done quite well in the TV series. But it's one of the key scenes in Dune, isn't it? It's where we get spice mining, Leo Keynes, and the worms, the spice all at once, and a real sense of peril from the natural world too. So it's definitely good fun. And we've got a very angry Duke Leto here, and we're going to head on to the banquet scene. So there we go, folks. Well, listen, that's us for tonight. Oh, goodness gracious. That wasn't too bad. I thought this was going to take 4.5 hours or something. Just the amount of notes I'd scribbled through, but that's kind of why I wanted to push at it at a bit of a speed. These big chapters are a bit unwieldy when it comes to doing these wee live chats, Thanks as always, says Cynthia. You're more than welcome, Cynthia. I was just working at this one all night, and then I've been working on the video. We've got 8 minutes, so we'll have the Alfred Bester Tiger video within hopefully 48 hours for you folks. We just got to put in a bunch more images, and then we have to get the thing rendered, and we'll have it up on YouTube. And in the meantime, I will say goodnight, and we'll see you next time on Thursday at 9 o'clock GMT for Chapter 16 of Dune, which is the banquet scene. Really looking forward to this one. And I'm hoping I've got enough pages in my notebook because I'm about to have filled it up. So we're going rightly. And I think in terms of action and stuff, that chapter there's an X amount revealed. The banquet scene is absolutely fundamental to understanding the Dune series. Never mind just Dune. And it's very Machiavellian, real Byzantine intrigue, and I think it's fun. It's a brilliant scene actually, and I think you can even get Frank Herbert reading the whole thing on vinyl. But yes, indeed. So bring some snacks, etc., and we will all join together for the banquet on Thursday. It's quite a decent chapter, but there's a in size, but there's so much in it, and it really does open up the world of the Imperium. I suppose we've had quite close look at the Empire. We've had Arrakis, Caladan, a little bit on Gidi Prime, but we haven't really seen many of the people, the players of this world, and that's where the banquet scene will sort of open all of that up, and we get to see Paul come into. I think Paul and Jessica interact in a very, very good way as well. So we'll keep it for Thursday. Listen, folks, as always, thank you very much for joining me. Much appreciated, and as always, thank you for your comments and your input. It's been great. And look after yourselves no matter where you are, and take care. And we'll see you on Thursday at 9 o'clock GMT. All the very best, and thank you now. Good night. Take care. Do 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 do.